There's a painting that hangs in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg that no art historian can fully explain. It's called The Great Fire, and it depicts Moscow in 1812, burning. Except when you look closely, really look, something is wrong. The fire doesn't burn like a normal fire. The buildings don't collapse the way buildings should collapse. And in the background, barely visible, there's a light that's too bright, too intense, too white, a light that looks nothing like flame. I stared at that painting for 3 hours. The museum guards thought I was insane, but I couldn't leave, because I'd seen that light before, in photographs from Hiroshima, in footage from nuclear tests, in documentary images of thermal devastation. That painting, created in 1812, shows the exact visual signature of a nuclear blast, and no one talks about it. The year 1812 is taught as the year Napoleon invaded Russia, a conventional war, muskets and cavalry, artillery and tactics. We're told Napoleon's army was defeated by winter and Russian resistance. 600,000 soldiers marched into Russia. Only 10,000 returned. The greatest military disaster in history. Except when you examine the evidence, when you look at what actually happened, nothing about 1812 makes sense as a conventional war. Because 1812 wasn't a war. It was an extermination. The systematic incineration of the Tartarian Empire, and they've been lying about it for 200 years. Let me show you something they don't teach in history class. In 1812, fires destroyed almost every major city across the northern hemisphere. Not small fires, not accidental fires, simultaneous catastrophic fires that consumed entire metropolitan areas in hours. Moscow burned for 6 days. The fire was so intense it created its own weather system. Eyewitnesses described a firestorm that generated winds strong enough to lift grown men off their feet. Temperatures so extreme that stone buildings melted. Stone doesn't melt in normal fires. New York burned in 1812. The entire southern district consumed in a single night. Official cause: unknown origin. Philadelphia had a massive fire. Baltimore burned. Washington, D.C. burned so completely they had to rebuild the White House. Boston had multiple fires. Charleston, New Orleans, all in 1812, all catastrophic, all officially listed as unfortunate accidents or consequences of the War of 1812. But here's what they don't tell you. Russia and America weren't at war with each other. Napoleon's campaign and the American War of 1812 happened simultaneously, but on opposite sides of the planet. There's no logical connection. And yet cities burned on both continents at the same time, with the same inexplicable intensity. I started collecting eyewitness accounts, letters, diaries, newspaper reports from 1812, and the descriptions are terrifying. Not because of what people saw, because of what they describe without understanding it. A woman in Moscow wrote, "The light came first, brighter than 1,000 suns. We covered our eyes, but the light burned through our hands. Then came the wind, then came the fire. Brighter than 1,000 suns." That phrase, that exact phrase, it appears in multiple accounts from 1812. A phrase that wouldn't be used again until Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita after Trinity test in 1945. "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." A man in Moscow described a great flash in the sky that turned night into day. The flash came before the sound came before the fire, and when the fire came, it came all at once, not spreading, appearing, as if the air itself was burning. Flash before sound. Thermal radiation traveling at light speed arriving before the shockwave. That's nuclear detonation, not conventional fire, and he described it in 1812. Another account from outside Moscow. A soldier wrote, "The trees were burnt but still standing, the leaves gone, the branches intact but black, and all the trees pointed away from the city centre, as if pushed by enormous wind. But there was no wind, just sudden death." That's blast pattern. Radial devastation from a central point. Trees stripped and directionally damaged. Classic nuclear detonation signature. Documented in 1812. I found a medical report from a Russian doctor treating survivors. He described symptoms that make your blood run cold. Patients exhibited strange wounds, burns without flame exposure, skin falling away in sheets, hair falling out in clumps, vomiting blood, death within days even without visible injury. Others survived the fire but died weeks later from mysterious sickness. That's acute radiation syndrome, described perfectly in 1812 by a doctor who had no concept of radiation. He was documenting the symptoms of nuclear fallout and didn't know it. The official history says Moscow burned because Napoleon's forces set fires during their retreat. Scorched earth tactics. Except the timeline doesn't work. The Agi, Great Fire of Moscow, began on September 14, 1812. Napoleon entered the city on September 14, 1812. His forces didn't have time to set systematic fires. They arrived and the city was already burning, already destroyed, already dead. And here's what breaks the official narrative completely. Napoleon's army was devastated before winter even started. The infamous Russian winter that supposedly destroyed his forces. That came in November. But by October, most of his army was already gone. Not defeated in battle, not frozen, just gone. 600,000 men reduced to scattered remnants in 6 weeks. No conventional war explains that casualty rate, unless they walked into something worse than war, unless they marched into the incineration zone of a civilization being systematically destroyed. I found a French military report, buried in archives, describing what Napoleon's scouts found as they advanced into Russia. Empty cities, perfectly intact but abandoned. Buildings undamaged. Food still on tables. Possessions left behind, as if entire populations had simply vanished. The report called it the Great Silence. Mile after mile of civilization with no one living in it. That's not war, that's evacuation. Mass evacuation before something catastrophic. And then the fires came. City after city, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Smolensk, simultaneously or in rapid succession. Each fire described with the same impossible characteristics. Too hot, too fast, too complete. Stone melting, metal flowing like water. Destruction so absolute that in some cities nothing remained but glass and ash. Glass. Let me explain something about glass. Normal fires don't create glass. To turn sand and stone into glass requires temperatures above 1,400 degrees Celsius, sustained temperatures. Even modern building fires rarely exceed 800 degrees, but across Russia in 1812 they found glass, pools of it, layers of it. Buildings fused into glossy black residue. That's nuclear heat. That's thermal. Devastation beyond anything conventional fire can produce. I went to Moscow, walked through the old city, started looking at the buildings, really looking, and I found something that changed everything. Scorch marks, not on the surface, embedded in the stone itself. Mineral discoloration, thermal metamorphosis, the kind of damage that requires instantaneous exposure to extreme heat. And it's everywhere. On buildings officially dated to pre-1812. Buildings that survived the fire, except they didn't survive. They're scarred at the molecular level. marked by something far more intense than Napoleon's retreat. There's a layer of ash under Moscow, under St. Petersburg, under every major Russian city, at precisely the same depth. Archaeologists call it the cultural discontinuity of the early 19th century. A polite way of saying civilization stopped, completely, at exactly the same moment. And when it started again, it was different, simpler, smaller, as if something had reset everything. But it's not just Russia. I started looking at other continents, the same year, 1812. In South America, the earthquake of Caracas destroyed the city on March 26, 1812. Except eyewitness accounts describe something stranger than earthquake. A priest wrote, "The ground did not shake, the ground burned. Heat rose from below. The buildings did not fall, they melted. The devastation was instant and total." In the Caribbean, volcanic eruptions devastated multiple islands in 1812. Except the eruption patterns were strange, simultaneous, coordinated, as if something triggered them all at once. In Asia, records show catastrophic fires across major cities, Delhi, Calcutta, Manila, all in 1812 or 1813, all described with the same impossible intensity. This wasn't regional, this was global. A worldwide catastrophe happening simultaneously across every continent. And the only explanation that fits is coordinated destruction. Systematic annihilation. A war not between nations but against a civilization. The Tartarian Empire. The greatest empire history refuses to acknowledge. A global civilization with advanced technology, unified architecture, and continental infrastructure. An empire so powerful, so advanced, so entrenched that the only way to defeat it was total destruction, nuclear destruction. Because here's what they don't want you to know. The technology existed, not steam engines, not gunpowder, nuclear technology. We have evidence. In ancient India, the Mahabharata describes weapons that sound exactly like nuclear devices. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. That's not mythology, that's technical documentation. Ancient sites around the world show evidence of vitrification. Stone turned to glass, Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, glass-covered ruins, radiation signatures above normal background levels, dated to thousands of years ago, but also present in ruins from 1812. What if the technology wasn't new? What if it was old? What if Tartaria had it? And what if the forces that destroyed them had it too? The War of 1812 was the cover story. Napoleon's invasion was the distraction. While the world watched armies march, something else was happening. The systematic nuclear bombardment of every major Tartarian city, Moscow, St. Petersburg, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Caracas, Delhi, simultaneous strikes, coordinated destruction, a reset of global civilization. And when it was over, when the radiation cooled, when the fires died, they rewrote history, blamed Napoleon, blamed accidents, blamed anything except the truth, that humanity was reset, that advanced civilization was incinerated, that we're living in the aftermath of nuclear war from 1812. The evidence is everywhere once you see it. The scorch marks, the glass layers, the radiation signatures, the impossible fire descriptions, the simultaneous global catastrophe, the cultural discontinuity, the sudden simplification of architecture after 1812, the loss of building techniques, the loss of knowledge, all consistent with systematic destruction of a civilization. I found a letter from a British engineer working in Russia in 1820. He wrote, "The destruction we attribute to Napoleon's retreat is far more extensive than any army could achieve. The cities are not damaged, they are transformed. The stone shows signs of heat no earthly fire could produce, and beneath the rubble we find foundations, magnificent foundations, of buildings far greater than what now stands, as if we are rebuilding poorly on the bones of giants. As if we are rebuilding poorly on the bones of giants. That's not reconstruction, that's replacement, inferior replacement, after extermination. The year 1812 was the year they killed Tartaria. Nuclear fire, simultaneous strikes, global incineration, and then they buried the evidence. Blamed conventional war, blamed weather, blamed anything but the truth, that humanity has been here before, that we were more advanced before, that we were destroyed before, and that the civilization we're living in now is not the first. It's the remnant, the survivors, the children of catastrophe who forgot their own history because someone made sure we would forget. The paintings remember, the scorch marks remember, the glass layers remember, the radiation signatures remember, the eyewitness accounts remember. Even though the historians lie, the evidence testifies. 1812 was nuclear. 1812 was global. 1812 was the end of Tartaria and the beginning of the lie we call modern history.